really is true. Good things never last. At least for those who deserve them. It's so funny. And you're in my position, someone of my class stats. You always think that you get to a place of relative stability and you always think that it's, oh, this is fine, this is fine, might even be great, just these last a little longer, all's going well, just these last a little longer, and someone fucks it. Someone above you has to fuck it. No matter how hard you try. No matter how much you fucking sacrifice. Yes, you get to a point where you're told at every turn that you're not good enough, you're not fast enough, you're not efficient enough, you're not robotic enough for my liking. So leave. And you just say, okay. No, I'm not going to convince you. Let me refine that a bit. Morons on this earth who say you never know until you try. Yes, you fucking do. Sometimes you do know before you try. No, actually, no. Someone like me knows before they try. And for those rare few who maybe I won't know until I try to negotiate with them, someone like me is able to pick out who those rare individuals are. So I know when I'm talking to someone who I will know how an interaction will go with them before I try it. piece of trash to most people. I mildly interest you for maybe a minute or two. And then, you've lost my attention.
I'll address why I was crying in the opening of this video. Well, to put it bluntly, as direct as possible, I was fired from the job placement that I had mentioned I was able to obtain here in the city at the beginning of the last part. I held that position at that bagel-themed cafe restaurant for 2 weeks. And then they just let me go. Why? Because apparently I'm not fast enough, I'm not efficient enough, my lifestyle they thought would conflict with continuing to be employed, even though it hadn't up until that point. Even with me having put in overtime for them and pulling 2 separate all-nighters. One the night of finishing recording the last video. So that I would be there on time. That day I did overtime. But when I told one of my coworkers this, who I'm incredibly happy to have met, another fellow intellectual, so glad that they were the one that actually got me the job in the first place when I had initially told them my situation. And when I told them that the owner had decided to let me go, and for the reasons they apparently held as to why, they said that's such an excuse. That's such a blatant, absolute excuse. Yeah, it is. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just a tiny dog. I thought maybe there were 2 dogs fighting. The owner used me. They exploited me for 2 weeks. They tried me out. Maybe a bit of a savior mentality. They heard my story through this coworker of my desperate situation and said, okay, fine, just bring him in. We'll see how he does for 2 weeks. They didn't say, this is what I know they were thinking. And then they just said, okay, we're going to let you go. We found someone else who we think will be more efficient. That was 4 days ago now. I've been looking like mad for another part-time or full-time position at various small businesses. So that's the short of it. I'll talk about that at a different point. This video, I'm going to be continuing to discuss the topic I did last time, part 2 to it, because there are more things that I want to address that I simply didn't have time to in the last video. Towards the end, one of which will be a particular commenter on the last video. But I'm going to state right now, to make this even, I will, once this video is done, I will have made 2 specific uploads directly, well, all my content pertains to it, but directly calling out, I guess you could call it, problematic ideals of the far left wing, and specifically extremist ideals, and how they masquerade as being beneficial morally, and that as if in terms of what they condone in terms of ethics and methodology, that it's not in any way, shape, or form similar to that of the right wing, and how detrimental it is. So I will have done 2, particularly because, me being a leftist, I'm very passionate about this. But to even this out, I will also, at some point in the near future, I will do 2 more videos discussing specifics in relation to the political spectrum in regards to centrism, extremist centrism, and the far right wing. I'll do that. I'm not going to make them a 2-parter. I'm just going to do one video for each. Lengthy videos, but regardless. So it's more balanced. Fair enough. So, oh, you get the point. Is there anything else that I can think of to address? No, let's just get into it, because I need to gather my thoughts. Okay, let's do this one. Okay, so let's do this first. This one issue that is top of mind right now, that I was going to address in the last one, that I briefly mentioned in the last video, but I didn't get around to it. But it's something that is really prevalent, really prevalent, the most out of all the other 2 issues that I'm going to address here. It's probably the most prevalent. You know what? They're all equal. They're all equally as prevalent. But I guess I hear this one talked about the most, probably, or brought up in any form. And and also, just to state, most of the specific issues regarding extreme far leftism, I'm going to talk about in this second part. I had discussed in the video I made when I was in Lévis, Quebec, when I was first there 6 months ago, the second part of the dispelling social myths that far too many people believe. The video that was removed by YouTube for unjustifiable reasons. But anyway, because this has been perturbing me for a while. So, the issue, sorry, it's been a long, exhausting day. Hold on. First thing to address. The idea that someone of a separate people demographic to a group that is under a specific, though intertwined, amount of oppression, that they cannot comment, be involved with the dispelling of, or hold any form of opinion on said oppression towards a specific group of people, or even furthermore, that doing so is oppressive in and of itself, as, or specifically of someone who is in relation to or of the background of a suppressive demographic to another, or has historically been so, that doing just that, opinion, commenting, having any sort of involvement in dispelling your demographic's oppression towards the other demographic, is inherently suppressive in and of itself. This is complete nonsense, as far as I'm concerned, and completely a morally deplorable and problematic belief. There's a lot of talk of this, especially around in regards to, hello fly, in regards to, hi, thank you, I don't particularly want a kiss from you, sorry. Please stay over there. This can be, this is most often probably seen in discussions of racial background, and in particular in regards to, say, white supremacy and mass cultural alienation, and the degrading and demeaning of both non-problematic and problematic cultural traditions and aspects of different ethnic groups throughout various diasporas of the world in that regard. But this claim has been made, and multiple times over, and is just as easily applied to every known people demographic on the planet, racially, sexually, gender-wise, religiously, age-wise, in terms of physical ability, disability, illness. It's class status, it's widespread. It can be applied to all. And I've heard arguments for such applying to all, but particularly in regards to race. The idea is, in terms of portions of the far left, that believe that commentating and making a judgment, holding any form of moral opinion, you really want to be friends, don't you? Is inherently supremacist in and of itself, that it's asserting an amount of domination metaphysically over that of a cultural background that is not of your own. This is the notion that's constantly hammered at when it comes to the idea of someone of a historically suppressive group to that of another, dispelling their group's own suppression. Or especially in regard, particularly as well, in regards to, say, particularly especially for the moral relativist far left, the idea that you can't judge the actions, you can't judge the moral actions of said group or a member of said group when either when faced with direct and blatant or subtle some form of interpersonal, immediate, tangible defamation, high prejudice being directed towards them, or just in general, just the moral actions of anyone a part of these demographics in general. Okay, so let me give, okay, first let me just state why I think this is complete nonsense. One, to put it in the most, for one reason, to put it in the most simplified way possible to my philosophies, is because we are all human beings. The idea that you cannot know the experience of of a person of a different background than you, that you can't, and in that you can't even try to gain any amount of insight or perspective into that person's experience, why they are the person they are, for the things that they have faced in their life, societally and interpersonally. That, and in doing so, that to help you empathize, you can't possibly relate what they are discussing with you, or they are expressing, or if you just observe what is happening to a person who is of a separate people demographic than you. Observe it, of what they're going through in some way, and that you can't try to cognitively relate that based on your own experience to what they are dealing with, to identify what it is and understand it. that you can't possibly do that. Taking your own life choices and the situations you've been put in, critically think about how they manifest, why they happen the way they did, and then place that onto another person, which I think in general, for those of this world who have higher levels of empathy and compassion, whether they're indoctrinated to corrupt systems or not, and they intellectually try to reason their way through the world. Realistically, that's probably the only way any amount of empathy actually happens. That's in relation to, I believe that human empathy comes from interactive loneliness. For human compassion and understanding and sympathy comes through the psychobiological process of our innate internal subconscious isolation. And realistically, relating your experience to another person's experience to help you understand what they're going through is the only way that, in most forms, not all, actually looking at the issue for why it happens is another reason as to why you can empathize with another person. But in terms of the deep-rooted emotional subconscious stimulation to understand how this has come about for another person, most often for most people who have empathy, only comes about through either, I feel, relating it to things they have been through, how it's in essence the same, or in some amount envisioning it imaginatively, imagining you in their situation, maybe even just trying to imagine yourself as being a part of that people group, as if you were someone, a part of that group, facing it. So that's the most basic one I could think of. And tied to that, the entire notion that you can't, especially this statement, because I've heard this specific statement, especially of online far leftist discourse. The statement that you can't understand the experience of another group, for that of someone who is of the oppressive background, that entire statement is a complete and total disbelief in empathy as a whole concept. If you believe that human beings of separate backgrounds cannot possibly understand the perceptions or gain the uttermost, yes, we can't. Our self-perceptions are solely our own. We can't fully ever know what someone else cognitively is going through. But we can get an amount of it. The idea that we cannot gain that uttermost insight into another human being's experience means that you quite literally can't possibly believe in the psychological concept of empathy being natural to human beings. You can't believe in that. That whole statement asserts the idea that human beings, at the very least, can only be empathic to their own groups. And that they're just completely sociopathic to every other demographic that isn't of their own. And I think this is complete ludicrous. This is a complete ludicrous notion. One, to disprove this, you can just simply go take a walk outside in a highly surface level, or not, in smaller communities, multicultural communal space. Let's go with, just say, the performative and the tolerance between those of different demographics that in actuality, though, have some amount of spite towards one another on some level. Well, I think the very fact that though we are all subtly, indirectly killing each other, we are. The whole world is contributing to humanity is contributing to humanity's own destruction and complete emotional murder of one another. I think the fact, though, that if you actually look in various communities, you step outside of, if you're of this belief and you are in a violent community, in a violent area or a situation, if you were to actually try to step away from that in a space that's close by to you, if you live in a city, a town, a village, whatever it is, whatever municipality you live in, the fact that we are not in broad daylight and in the dark of night, all human beings that pass by one another were not bludgeoning each other with whatever heavy object we can find first at the slightest flicker of anger or dissatisfaction or annoyance. The fact that we're not mutilating each other immediately, once met with conscious apathy, is sign of the fact of human empathy. Sign of the fact that in actuality, people are not naturally sociopathic and do not want to actually harm each other. Now, I have a theory called globalized social paranoia, where most people in the world, as far as I'm concerned, 1 in every 3 individuals, suffers from some form of social paranoid disorder because of the years of societal trauma spread to different people groups. And those who want to make the claim the only reason that the littlest amount of compassionate societal functions are still in or continue to be present is because of this idea that external forces will quell us ourselves with harm if we attempt to act in this violent behavior. well, you then need to take a look at your own... You need to take a look at your reasoning there. Okay, so, and yes, this is how the belief goes, this misanthropic delusion. So you believe that human beings are only tolerable of one another because of societal forces that will quell us with force, if not. Well, by this logic, once again, it should be that these forces would just quell you continuously with mass, blatant, violent aggression. Always. At all points. The idea of this, you should have no... If that is the case, then you absolutely should have no problem with enacting violence yourself. Why the paranoia doesn't... Why it's a paranoid disorder. Why I call it as such. This hysteria that I need to fall in line and conform in order so that I don't get hurt. But in actuality, everyone wants to hurt me, and I want to hurt everyone else. There should be then no reason for why you have not actually incited this violence. Whether or not there are societal forces that will attempt to quell you. It doesn't make any sense. This shouldn't even be a notion to stop you. Just a quick little thing as well for this misanthropic belief that is sadly... that has bled into elements of the far left. More of an upper political gray area there for my redesign. But, okay, more of an upper political gray area, I'll just say that. Damn, I just lost it for a second. Hold on, let me get it back. Got it. Came back. I feel that a lot of self-proclaimed misanthropists, in regards to thinking that humanity is completely manically psychopathic, a lot of times they don't actually look at this from an introspective level. They don't. Sure, are there some amount of right-wing intellectuals? At the end of this video, I'm going to actually explain what I mean by right-wing or centrist intellectuals. Are there those who have come to that conclusion through critical thought? Yeah, sure. I'm sure there are. But for those who haven't, who are just who have come to this philosophical conclusion because of years of severe depravity and the onset of a depressive disorder, in that I feel a lot of times they don't look at it from an introspective level. Like, they don't, what I mean, they don't actually emotionally take a moment to fully reflect on how they internally feel consciously. Or tapping into more maybe of a pre-conscious, an attempt at pre-conscious analysis they don't ever ask themselves, do I maliciously want to harm other people? They don't ever ask. They just assume, because of the years of trauma, that human beings are psychobiologically geared towards hedonistic egocentrism and domination over another people group. But most don't, I don't think, actually ask themselves whether they want to hurt other human beings or not. Maybe they think, well, it's just natural whether I try or not. The only amount of advice I could give there is I think you need to do a bit more introspection as to whether you want to harm other people or not. And then I think you'll have your answer as to your dilemma with human nature. But pulling this back to the idea that another people group can't comment or advocate on behalf of another group, let me paint morally why this doesn't work as well, coming from the relativistic viewpoints. Let me paint a scenario. There is, okay, say a person of Han Chinese background who is pansexual and adorns more gender fluid attire in terms of gender expression. Let's say they are being interrogated, pulled over whilst driving, or in some public setting. They're being interrogated by a predominantly white country, ethnically. They're being interrogated by a white, cis male, predominantly, and heterosexual, predominantly cis masculine, white presenting. Let's say it's in Germany. Let's say this is in Germany. They're being interrogated by a German police officer, and who's incredibly domineering, incredibly forceful, who has a mass amount of severe sociopathic racial bias and sexuality prejudice, and transphobic, highly, highly right-wing prejudice towards this individual who, of the person of Han ethnicity and who is of the LGBTQ+. That's this scenario. Those of the far left who are of the believe in the ideal value that it is not morally right for me, they won't use the word morally, but it is not right for me to judge how the individual being interrogated, the oppressed individual being interrogated by the police officer, being severely harassed, reacts to them, whether it be through verbal spite and disregard for the officer as a human being, in essence, or physical violence, attempts physical violence, whether in self-defense or not. That it's not right for anyone who isn't of that community to make judgment on what they choose to do, because they don't have the cultural experience, or they haven't been raised in the environment or the background of the oppressed person. They don't have the life exchange, they don't have the life experience that they do. Suffering under oppression say, of forces such as the white German male police officer, his oppression towards and contributions to greater collective oppression towards this group. Say that. By that logic, you cannot judge what the German police officer does to the oppressed person. By this same moral ideal, the idea that you cannot know another people group's experience, and I'm specifically speaking in regards to those of far left ideals who are not of the background of that of a Germanic white person who is more cis male presenting, who is within the law enforcement system, who is in this part of German cultural heteronormativity. This specific people demographic, they're not a part of it. And even for those who are a part of the same, in essence, background as the officer and claiming this, that it's not right to judge that who is being oppressed. By the idea that you can't know the experience of someone of a different background in its entirety, by this logic, you cannot judge the officer, the oppressor, for what they are choosing morally to do, because they have grown up and been raised, very clearly from my stance, in a traumatizing, severely destructive cultural background, to a point of inducing psychopathic personality disorder, domineering behavioral disorder, severe homophobia, or severe panphobia, severe transphobia, severe prejudice towards someone who is of what would be considered left-wing presentation ideoculturally as well. Because, as I just stated, you don't have the experience of the oppressor. You didn't grow up in the harsh white supremacist background of the being presented with the lie that it is morally condonable to have a superiority complex, have a hierarchy over ethnic background. You didn't grow up with the staunch homophobia towards any sexual expression, or just any sexual expression at all, even if it was heterosexual, being, say, displayed publicly. I think you get the point. By the claim that you can't know the experience of the oppressed, you cannot know the experience of the oppressor. On even, for more specifically, an individual basis interpersonally. And there will be those who claim that, well, they are still, in terms of, let's say, ethnic background, well, it's still part of the white diaspora. If someone's of far left ideals and they're of white ethnicity, they're still of the same diasporic background, and if they're of heterosexual or heteroromantic attraction, they do know the environment to some degree. It's still not on an interpersonal level of how this person was raised, and very clearly so from the very fact of how you, if you're arguing this, how you turned out as a person morally and personality-wise, psychologically, what route you had gone down and this officer had gone down. Very clearly not. And people will keep arguing of the idea that it is superioritizing and contributing to the oppression to hold any sort of, to defame, to defame, say if the oppressed individual was to employ tactics of internalized prejudice or that of the oppressor in regards to dealing with being in harsh subjugation, or in regards to what I consider to be far leftist sociopathic spite towards the oppressor, disregarding the officer's humanity, there will be those that argue condemning that. There's this belief that condemning just all around, there's this belief that on the far left, that condemning the actions of another leftist, one is inherent, as I mentioned in the last video, is inherently anti-leftist, and that it inherently condones the ideals of the oppressor. And I'll get into that later in the video more. Well, that's complete nonsense. But so, my train of thought is slipping again. Another point I had to make. Okay. So that's one example. Let's bring in another. As far as I'm concerned, a realistic example. You're in a community that is predominantly, and I'm speaking, though I do believe oppression exists within other people groups that are racially, let's say, oppression exists that is not solely internalized racism towards that of a supremacist racial background that is not inherently, could be counted as white supremacy, but supremacy of that background, which I'll get, but caused from white supremacy. Okay. You're in a community that is predominantly white. Say it's in upper North America, somewhere. Now let's use the example of rural Canada. In rural Canada, predominantly white background, because of the mass colonialization and brutal expulsion of various indigenous groups off of their land, persists to this day. There is a person in a predominantly white town that is highly racist, highly bigoted towards those of indigenous background, indigenous Canadian background. hold on, let me construct this a bit better. There is someone of indigenous ethnicity who is being severely harassed by, say, certain members of the township in a public area, and those who just subtly condone the oppression, or who are so socially anxious they can't bring themselves to intervene in any way, even so much as saying for them to stop it, dispelling them verbally, which I would condone. They just don't, and though the person of indigenous background is defending themselves, is confidently defending themselves, it's still getting aggressive, not on their part, on the part of the predominant of the white individuals who are aggravated. And no one else is stepping in to even draw attention to it. And someone finally decides, who is of white background, a member of the town, completely does not condone it and is against the mass oppression and dehumanization being thrown at them, steps in and tries to aid them and defend them as well. Not violently, verbally. Well, not spitefully. They try to dispel the aggressor's notions towards them and stand with them in them defending themselves, the indigenous person. There will be those of the far left who call this a white savior complex. There are many of the far left who believe that any action taken by a white individual towards a person of non-white background, non-white ethnic background, or in any way is trying to aid in dismantling and dispelling the moral rightist white supremacist oppression of the world, will believe that that is inherently being an ally. That's not allyship, when it absolutely is. That's the definition of what an ally is. Politically. That all attempts made are inherently white savior-esque, of that of a white savior complex mentality. No. I'm going to run you through what, as far as I'm concerned, a white savior mentality, or any savior mentality actually is, in any form, specifically, psychologically, the mental condition of a savior complex. Whether what they are morally doing is beneficial or detrimental, that of a savior complex. A savior complex is believing that because of who you are as a person, from the background you've been raised in, the position that you hold socially, in terms of a social dynamic, because of this, you or only someone like you inherently can aid in protecting a specific person, or in this, a collective people demographic, that only people such as yourself can protect and defend this group of people for them, not aiding in protecting them. Solely they can do it for them in an infantilizing manner, as if they are not able to defend themselves. That is a savior mentality. Someone of a background simply trying to protect those of another is not. Why? Because it is not inherently rooted on a surface level contradiction. The want and desire for compassionate aid is not inherently because they view it as their background being the only human beings that are capable of politically defending another group. There is aid comes from the idea of collective compassion and dispelling oppression, because they believe that it is deplorable for the reasons, well, for their, specifically for mine, coming from that of a nihilistic existentialist background, of optimistic nihilistic existential thought. And that is really prevalent amongst the far left. This idea that, and again, it doesn't just apply to ethnicity and ethno-cultural background. This can be in relation to the LGBTQ+, to age, to illness, to spiritual background, to class status, financially, all around. The idea that because you are of the, or specifically in that because there's the idea that because you are of the oppressive group in some manner, and it's really morally unjustifiable, is quite literally, you cannot, of factors that you associate to, quite literally factors that are on some level biologically determined for you, not the cultural assignment to the biology, but conflation of the there's conflation of the cultural orientation around the biology to just solely being that of the inherent biology. That anyone of that oppressive background who is trying to dispel their demographics' obscene, horrific beliefs and actions is inherently doing it out of a savior martyrdom redemption-esque complex, which, as for the reasons stated, for if someone has intellectualized and observed the world around them, how disgusting that the morality of the oppressor has been, and in that, or as well, has been through the traumatic experience of being a part of that oppressive group, has been right there alongside it, being a part of the group that enacts these disgusting morals, that it's just solely to redeem themselves, is completely idiotic and untruthful. In relation to traumatization, as far as I'm concerned, they have seen the deplorability of it and want to aid in dismantling it. And there will be people who say, but why don't they just do it from within the people demographic instead of coming into the space of another? One, most often those who do that do, and they, okay, you can't separate, as far as I'm concerned, my theory of the ontologic inherence of intersectionality, philosophically, to dispel it from within or outside of your own people demographic is innately a vice versa effect. You can't. You are quite literally relating the issue of control and subjugation between peoples. There's no way for you in any shape or form to dispel and condemn the morality of an ideology of people without it affecting, in regards to its oppression of another, without it affecting the oppressed group. You can't. That's a given with the idea of an oppressor and an oppressed. It's a given. It's vice versa. Yeah, I'm gonna find, like the last video, I'm gonna find another spot to talk about this, because it's getting late, and I don't know if the lighting system works around here, and I'd prefer not to be bitten by mosquitoes. And underneath my feet on this bench, I smell the vague scent of urine. Or maybe it's feces. Or maybe it's both. So yeah, let me do that. Next day. Sorry for all this negative space. Given the hour, I couldn't find a more convenient location, and also sorry that I look like just a floating torso. That I'll have to couldn't position the camera in any other way. And yes, I am in a rather spacious public park washroom. It's open 24 hours. I have not eaten the best today, or best quality of food, for financial reasons, but so forgive me if I'm, and on top of that it's late, so just have some compassion and whatever. Okay, the next part that I want to address in regards to an issue pertaining to the far left is that in relation to specifically of the understanding of the field of sexology, more specifically in regards to sexuality, expression and interaction and activity, all amongst, and especially within the LGBTQ+, but this is in regards to sexuality as a concept of human development, human psychosexuological development. there is and very sad to see, especially in the LGBTQ+, as well as in regards to just, should have used this terminology for what I was trying to say, that of sex positive culture and ideology. There is a present and ageist disregard of children and teenagers' sexual developmental health. What do I mean more specifically in regard to that? Hold on. Sorry, I had to actually use the facilities myself. So what do I mean by that? I mean that there is a disregard for the fundamental natural development of sexual attraction, and in that, sexual expressionism within children and teens, and thus relating to gender identity and orientation in that. Now, for those of you who agree with a lot of my points, or in these two particular videos pertaining to this topic, have followed me up until here, you might be thinking, well, no, Cam, that's very clearly a right-wing principle, a rightist degradation, as well as an amount of a centrist degradation towards sexual expression, as the left wing is inherently in even extreme principles for the liberation of sexuality. And again, even with the presence, you could argue, of sexual hedonism that has been adopted by those of far left leaning ideals. Well, actually, no. And here's the thing with that. Amongst what I consider in the political phi and the political fez spectrum, my design, in regards to falling in moderate leftists to center leftists, the entire, more so again, lower towards the centrist starting point, there is the already present bouts of homophobic or homosexist or sexuality prejudice towards non-heteronormative attraction in general amongst those of falling leftist to center leftist ideal values. I think that's very apparent, and not as much, but an amount being a part of it, going into moderate leftism, that of amounts of more of the anti-moralist and moral relativist argumentation for sexual attraction, which is still ever present amongst rising leftists, in my category, and far leftists. So there's already that prejudice, there's that ignorance that's within the far left, within just the left-wing sphere. But in relation to the far left, there's been, especially, as always, it in some way pertains to, I sound like a broken record saying this, internet political discourse, but even in terms of prominent, organized demonstrations, even in public, or any sort of academic involvements in relation to sexology and the study of sexual attraction and LGBTQ plus issues, or that of just in the entire essence of sexuality as a whole in all its facets. There has been a growing ignoring of children and teenagers' involvement with sexuality, and more specifically in regards to sexual entertainment and sex work as a whole. Now, I'm obviously going to have to state, if you're someone who doesn't hold similar values towards sex work as it pertains as a profession in the world, as I do, then you're obviously not going to follow my next few points, not even going to agree with me at all. I've talked about this before. I've mentioned this here and there, the point I'm going to get at. But if you do agree with my ideals towards the non-inherent problematic essence of sexual entertainment as it pertains to a profession in a capitalist society, and just as what is conceptually considered to be sex work as a concept, taking the word work out of that, just sexual interactions, how they manifest in what is seen of the sexual entertainment cultural sphere. There is a push by members of the far left who believe in the liberation of sexual oppression, who argue it for non-problematic, provably non-problematic and non-detrimental innately sexualities, not for the what can be considered problematic ones, but even then there's issues with governmental enforcement and promotion. But in regards to sexual attraction that is non-problematic, heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality, pansexuality, androsexuality, asexual, on. There is this growing sentiment that it is only something that should be expressed, should be engaged with in any way, shape, or form as a whole amongst those who are in their adult years, especially in regards to sexual entertainment or sex work involvement. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and I've stated this before, both on YouTube and on my porno channel, I do not, being an anarchist, I do not believe, I used to, but I don't anymore, I do not believe you can successfully regulate any amount of interactions between human beings. it is implausible. That's the best way I can put it. It is absolutely implausible. But in regards to certain professions, certain activities, let's say in regards specifically here to sex work, I do not believe that children and teens should obtain professions in that field. Overall, I do not think individuals of younger generations should go towards that until they are older, in terms of work profession. I think it would be more beneficial to wait until they are of later teenage to count as in early 20s, young adult years of age range, for it to be overall, in terms of, I keep coming back to the obvious looming concept. I remember I got into a conversation with someone I know about this, about my views towards sexual entertainment, and the conversation kept getting stuck with the concept of work, the concept of occupation for employment, and I finally had to sever like my beliefs towards it, as I fundamentally don't believe in the concept of work at all. I don't even, being an anarcho-communist, I don't believe in the concept of employed work for wage enslavement. But in regards to this, in any sort of clientele, let's call it clientele activity, I think it would be better, safer overall, for those of younger years to wait until they're older to actually enter into practice in the profession in terms of providing a service, a sexual service. However, what I am completely for, and I do think that those who are children and teens should absolutely engage in, within obviously their comfortability, is that of it's one of those walking indicators with the distress alarm for those who have visual impairments. Anyway, I believe that they should absolutely be exploring and engaging sexually, discovering their sexual attractions amongst their own age ranges. And in relation specifically to age range in regards to sexual service, though this isn't, despite what the sexual entertainment industries of the world wait. The sex work industries of the world completely disregard that of the concept of very much provably appropriate age ranges. Not in the sense of in regards to sex work, that is a viable thing as well. It's not that being a part of sexual entertainment, you are open or obligated in any form to interact with any age range for sexual activity, which is a destructive concept in itself. But, okay, it is absolutely beneficial as far as I'm concerned, and should be encouraged for youth to explore sexually and romantically amongst their own age ranges, close in age range to each other, of all years, in regards to close within those who are of younger demographics. Because if I have to put this as bluntly as I can, we know very clearly, psychosexologically, especially highly during the development of puberty, that with the influx of hormones further accumulating in the body structure and development, and that of exposure psychologically to familial environments, that cultural aspects and people, elements of human beings that will absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, from what I've expressed of my thoughts of how sexual attraction develops, will occur during childhood and teenhood, later, mid to late adolescent development. And in that, it's another reason for here why I am not in favor of, and this is the particular part as well, with sadly encouragement from members of the far left community, that of the existence of age of consent laws. Now, this argument has been ping-ponged back and forth and portrayed from the right wing. It's been portrayed from a very obvious predatory, sexually predatory, phobophilic and hebephilic over-sexualization of youth, and just severely sexually encroaching stance. And from the left, the far left, and that one was being a bit unfair. It's been a large portion of the leftist sphere, in some form, the notion that the law inherently protects minor individuals, that it is inherently condoning state judicial enforcement, that having the law inherently protects those of minor age ranges from older individuals attempting to sexually assault or have sexual predatory involvement with their livelihoods, and that anyone who argues against the law in placement is a pedophile, an ephebophile, or hebephile. Arguing that they're a pedophile, as they don't know what that term means. So, you already know my thoughts on governmental control. In favor of anarchism. Do not want intervention of state power into the intersocietal structure of communal systems. This, and what the far left continuously always forgets, is this applies to every single realm of life, every single realm of human existence. And that includes sexuality. And the reality is in that, and not just for older laws that prohibit interactions between older and younger age ranges, but amongst younger age ranges themselves, this is very detrimental and completely unenforceable, as is all manner of law enforcement on some level, but especially so with how the westernized world is set up and the world that has been further westernized. There is no way with the youth groups that form in the various communities of the world, unless there was complete mass surveillance, and in that complete and total high-level community security, there is no way that you can prevent children and teenagers from romantically and sexually interacting with each other and exploring. There isn't. I don't think, for anyone who has higher intellect, I don't think I need to really give many examples of. I think all I need to do is point at the entire social dynamics of secondary schools, high schools, and middle schools, public schools around the world, or that even going into, and depending on the nation's, the entry level for post-secondary schooling for college and university, as it ranges all across the globe from mid to late teens to early 20s, or into mid 20s. It completely ranges across the globe. I just need to point at those facilities, the individuals who are within them, and you have the obvious example. You have those who argue against that, the point I'm making in regards to the regulation of sexual intimacy and romantic intimacy between close in age range youth. They've clearly forgotten they clearly were completely oblivious, dealing with their own traumas, in what specific traumas they were dealing with during their time in the schooling years, or they were homeschooled. There's the answer for that. So, as far as I'm concerned, this enforcement, especially focusing in regards to close in age range youth, is highly detrimental. As for the few who are punished for morally justifiable age range interactions amongst their demographic, it leads to a disastrous outcome for pretty well life, or, well, in regards to a criminal record for life. don't want to portray that as if, no, anyway. So there's that. But there will be those who, despite being for sexual expressionism and embracement of cultural traditions and phenomena that have come about through that of the LGBTQ plus and sexual liberation, who portray it as if this is something, again, that solely takes large development when you are of older generations, or I'll call it young adult. Like someone who is of my current, starting at my current age range. I'm 20 years old right now, going further up into early to mid 20s. Malarkey. And it will press on the idea that it is unsafe for younger generations to interact, not working, but interact specifically with sexual entertainment, any form of sexual filmography, erotica writing, in-person observation of, say, strip sexual performance in terms of taking clothes off for physical expression performance, things of the sort. Which, because they argue this point, coming from this idea, this subtle idea that sex is inherently hedonistic. And for the infection of the philosophy of hedonism into sexual entertainment, there will be a peddling of this. Those that either are genuinely for praise of LGBT culture or performatively do so, either or. This notion that sex is inherently of this hedonistic exploitative value, because that's all the philosophy of hedonism is to me. And especially, and this is the really, really detrimental part, this idea that sexual activity is inherently traumatizing to children and teens. No, it's not. It's a surface level contradiction. It's a manufactured double standard that doesn't hold up with the very notion of the fact of even thinking that the development occurs later on in youth or going into adulthood, when most of these individuals damn well know that they began feeling, this is coming into an amount of internalized sexuality prejudice, that they damn well felt these urges and sexual arousal for specific types of individuals, specific genders, and fetishes in relation to their sexual attraction. they know that they started having developmental urges earlier on. Because I've heard this argument, even when I was in high school, I heard this argument. From those of my peer group, I heard this argument. That it really does just sound like internalized stigma. That they didn't feel any amount, those who had attractions that weren't asexual, or even those who developed asexual attraction, asexuality, or eros, aromantic, and asexual, that they either didn't make judgment on what they felt, or they just thought, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure if I feel one way or another, which, let me stress, that's not a problem being confused, or not confused, being undecided and not being fully aware of what you are sexually attracted to, if you have an attraction. But what I mean by that is as if, what's a good way to put it? Specifically for asexuality, that as if these individuals had no insight into it. That's the best way I can put it right now. When they know, if I could talk to any of those peers now in their older selves, could reflect back and think, yeah, I know that I very obviously did have leaning orientation towards that. But anyway, this notion that sexual activity is traumatizing to children innately, and in that sexual entertainment is destructive, so that pornography, that strip dancing, that erotic or pornographic illustrations, or erotic video games, or the list goes on, is inherently destructive and does not at all play an involvement in sexological development. It's peddled a lot, and it's particularly disturbing and degrading, as far as I'm concerned, to the LGBTQ plus and nudist culture, as, okay, let me put this bluntly. For those of the far right and the far left, who are just the right wing as a whole, and the center, because this is one that's prevalent in many regards all across it. If you believe that sex is inherently dangerous and that nudity is inherently obscene, you are against the fundamental physiology of human life. You're against it. In relation to sexual intercourse, or if used, artificial insemination, you are against the entire process of creating human life, human birth. You're against it. You cannot claim
that sex is traumatizing when it is the very thing that creates human life. You can't. There is no way to argue that in any logical form. It is in specific. Not. Okay, actually, no. Let me. I was about to say something, but then I realized no. That's could be more of a heteronormative idea. Something that I nearly forgot. I was going to say in relation to heterosexuality, the creation of life, but no. In regards to polyamorous relationships or communal involvement in aiding in conceiving a child, which there are multiple cases of this in regards to homosexual in regards specifically to those who are feminine presenting or more feminine physicalities, and sapphic of artificial insemination for giving birth or in aiding giving birth to a child. This has existed in multiple different cultures. But there will be those who really are of the belief on the far left that sex is something that sex should only be discussed. It should only be discussed amongst the youth. It shouldn't be engaged with other than mere discussion. That's a real big, that's a present belief. Now, in regards to interactions in relation to sexual profession and that of age range, do I think that people who are within large age gaps should be intimate between each other? No, I don't think so. Why specifically? Because there is mountains of proof in early youth, highly volatile developments of the nervous system that control the psychological state, as far as I'm concerned. The nervous system's high sensitivity during the pubescent development in adolescence would be better and is provably responsive in a healthy sense to those who are in the same developmental range as well. Their bodies physiologically are going through the same development. Whereas an older individual is already physiologically highly developed, even though, as far as I'm concerned, the body continuously develops and the brain structure continuously has there is no definitive stopping point of neurodevelopment, physical development of any kind, but is more so matured than those who are younger. That is why I am against and think it is problematic the sexual attractions of nepiophilia, pedophilia, hebephilia, that was the wrong order, amphibophilia, and hebephilia. And here's, okay, looks like there's gonna be a third part to these videos. As I was gonna do another point, but this is getting too long. The last one will be a lot shorter. In regards to sexual attraction, when amongst the far left wing and the rising left wing that I notice more often, and going into moderate, there is a real there is no coherent argument most often made against those four sexual attractions. There are specifically pedophilia and amphibophilia and hebephilia. No one on all sides of the spectrum, for the most part, unless they are in the studying field of sexology, knows the proper terminology for these age range attractions. So let me explain it. Nepiophilia is the sexual arousal and attraction of individuals who are within infantile age range. Pedophilia is the sexual arousal and attraction of anyone who is in toddler years going all the way up to early pubescent development, you could say the ages of 5 to 11 or 12. And phebophilia is the attraction of anyone between the age ranges, or in cultures that numerically keep count of birthdays, ages between 13 and 15, arousal of that age group. And hebephilia is the attraction of specifically 16 to 18 or 19 years. That is the definition of those sexual attractions. And I make the assertion that they sadly are developed sexual attractions and not mental disorders. As I have talked about in my scientific proposal videos, my theories towards such. But when arguing morally against interactions of this kind that are pedophilic, amphibophilic, or hebephilic, and especially whether consentful or unconsentful, the argument always comes from the stance of just the person is a creep. There is never any real argument for the psychological, in that biological, sexobiological health of the individuals. There's no arguing for why it's unethical to engage in that behavior, in that sexual interaction, based on human health. There's no argument ever. It always boils down to, why would you do that? They're kids. Why would anyone even feel that attraction? or adults have nothing in common with youth, which isn't true as well, but that's a topic for another. That's a topic I'll add on in the next video, because I'm gonna have to make 3 of these. So I wanted this to be the last one that I specifically dived into this, but I have too many thoughts for this, too many issues with my side of the spectrum that I want to just lay out. So I'm gonna make a 3rd one. And I wanna do it quick because I wanna get going with starting the video series of exploring Quebec City. So, and the argument that legal enforcement and prohibiting those of youth from engaging with sexual entertainment or going into the profession will prevent interactions as such is not truthful. I point to grade A evidence of the modern world that we live in right now, and the fact that encroaching assault from adult figures to minors happens not in these spaces and regardless of the law. Now, in regards to all of this in coming from an ethical situationalist standpoint, is there any scenario where someone of a relatively younger and older age range could have a healthy functioning sexual relationship, or that being youth deciding if they have observed their current life position, going into sexual service favors, at least even amongst their age range, that I would condone it? Sure, there's some hypothetical out there, I'm sure. It's not far less for the age gap, but in regards to sexual service, especially if it was amongst their own age range, then as far as I'm concerned, so be it. If that is what is, given the circumstances of their life and their exploration and development, if they feel that it is better for them to go into the field and explore that, I'm absolutely for that. Though, as I said, I still encourage individuals who are younger to wait into going into it and explore alongside the entertainment, using the entertainment, sexual entertainment, as a means of exploration. That is one of the reasons I create pornography myself, especially to aid in those who are younger, who are going through exploring their sexualities and developing such, as it did for me when I was exploring mine. Okay, that'll be getting to the end of this video, but before this ends, I'm just going to address one more thing. Sorry, really, 2 more things. So, some good news. I stated at the beginning of this video that I was let go from the employment I had managed to gain here in Quebec City around when I first got here, held for 2 weeks, and that I had been searching extensively to find another place of employment. Well, thankfully, come tomorrow, I may have that. It is at another bakery. Well, it's not a restaurant this time, it's solely a small business bakery close to where I have been staying in the city. that I went in and inquired about employment, and the owner actually reached out to me via my contacts and asked if I was still looking for employment. And it wasn't them saying, okay, with me being there asking for employment in person, saying, okay, we'll have you come in, try things out, and see if you're a good fit. Obviously, that's what, if things go well tomorrow, that is what will be happening. But this time, it took a day or so for them to actually think on it and respond back to me with the information I had left with an attendant at the little shop that the bakery is in. So that's uplifting, especially with where my finances are at right now, as I'm down to currently $160 or so in total. That'll rise within the next week with the last paycheck I get from the other place, but even so. That's why I didn't eat the best today. And in terms of what I said earlier in the video in regards to a certain commenter on the last one that I was going to address, I'm not going to, when I don't have time here, I'm not going to bother to here. As one, I feel I made my point expressly clear to that person in the comments section of the last video. Expressly clear. But I will instead address them further when I make a video pertaining to the far right wing. Specific, that's in similar fashion to what I'm doing here. I'll save it for that, because I don't want to waste my breath anymore, or waste the muscle tissue and bone structure of my thoughts to type. But to address somewhat of what the ignorance that individual was coming from, who I, despite what they claim, I have empathy for, and I feel sorry for how you've turned out as a person. To display these again, as I've done quite a few times now. To sum it up, this person thought everything I was complaining about in the first part of this little series, that I myself, they regard myself as just a pseudo-intellectual lefty. You can think whatever fantasy you like. This is not the work of a pseudo-intellectual. That is the result of excruciating time and effort and strife put in to understanding humanity. It's clear you know nothing about me, my history as a person on this channel. You haven't taken a look through my catalog. And you haven't read what amounts of my work are available online, which I will soon post more. Part 3 coming soon.